The story of the real Godfather of Harlem, Bumpy Johnson. In a world where the law was designed to break him and the mob was built to own him, one man decided to build his own throne. They called it the Black Mecca. He called it home. To the police, he was a ghost. To the Italians, he was a headache. But to Harlem, Bumpy Johnson was the only king they ever acknowledged. Hi, subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's go into the story. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was one of the most powerful and influential gangsters in American underworld history. He was the undisputed godfather of Harlem, and in those streets, his word was law. Want to run an illegal gambling operation? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to open a speakeasy or numbers joint? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to do anything illegal in Harlem? You had to go through Bumpy. Even Frank Lucas, the notorious drug trafficker immortalized by Denzel Washington in American Gangster, started as one of Bumpy's protégés. Lucas himself once said, "If you wanted to do business in Harlem, you did it with Bumpy Johnson, or you were dead." The power Bumpy commanded was unprecedented. Whenever corrupt police or crooked politicians needed something handled in Harlem, they came to him. When the Italian Mafia, the most powerful criminal organization in America, wanted to operate in Harlem, they didn't just muscle their way in. They sat down with Bumpy Johnson and negotiated. This was a man who made Lucky Luciano himself show respect. No other African-American gangster of that era had ever achieved such power and influence. Think about that for a moment. This was Jim Crow America, a time when racial discrimination wasn't just common, it was the law. Black men were systematically excluded from legitimate paths to wealth and power. They faced obstacles at every turn, fighting just to claim a small piece of the American dream. Even in the criminal underworld, where the rules were supposedly different, white mobsters controlled everything. Bumpy Johnson was the exception to every rule. But he didn't start at the top. Like all legends, Bumpy Johnson began at the very bottom. A frightened 14-year-old boy fleeing racial violence in the South, arriving in Harlem with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning determination to never bow to anyone. This is his story. Bumpy, whose real name was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, was born on October 31, 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina. This was the heart of Jim Crow South, where racial segregation wasn't just practiced, it was brutally enforced. His family settled in Charleston's black neighborhood, carving out what life they could in a world designed to keep them down. The Johnsons were a modest family, but they were respected in their community. They were deeply religious, attending church every Sunday without fail. His father, William Johnson, worked as a fisherman, hard, honest labor that barely kept the family fed. His mother, Margaret, worked as a domestic servant, cleaning the homes of white families who wouldn't let her through the front door. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had 8 children: Margie, Priscilla, Pauline, Willie, Mabel, Lena, Elise, and finally Ellsworth, nicknamed Bumpy from birth due to a distinctive bump on the back of his skull. That bump would become famous on the streets of Harlem, but in Charleston, it was just a mark on a small boy growing up in impossible circumstances. Young Bumpy Johnson stood out at school for his exceptional intelligence and charisma, skipping 2 grades but never finishing high school, a shame he masked with convincing lies about elite education. His sharp mind and confidence fooled others into believing his fabricated credentials, while a deep-seated rage against Southern racial injustice fueled his rebellious spirit from a young age. This simmering anger nearly shattered his family when he was just 10 years old. The night everything changed. It started with his brother Willie. At 19, Willie Johnson was accused of killing a white man in South Carolina. In that time and place, it didn't matter if the accusation was true or false. It didn't matter if Willie was defending himself or if it was a case of mistaken identity. All that mattered was that a black man stood accused of harming a white man, and in South Carolina, that meant only one thing: a lynch mob. The Johnsons knew exactly what awaited Willie if he stayed. They'd all heard the stories, whispered in churches, spoken of in hushed tones after dark. Stories like what happened to Kit Bookard. Kit Bookard was a 21-year-old black man from Berkeley County, just 60 kilometers from where the Johnsons lived. In 1904, a year before Bumpy was born, Kit had gone fishing with 6 white men. On the way back, a dispute broke out. One of the white men had apparently struck Bookard's younger sister, and Bookard threatened retaliation. That threat cost him everything. When they returned to town, Bookard was arrested and hit with a $5 fine, money he didn't have. So they threw him in jail, but that wasn't the end of it. That night, a mob of white men came for him. They demanded the sheriff hand him over, and the sheriff complied. They dragged Kit Bookard to the edge of a river and subjected him to unimaginable torture. They scalped him, gouged out his eyes, cut off his genitals and his tongue. Then they tied his mutilated body to a grate and threw him into the river to drown. Not a single person was ever brought to justice for Kit Bookard's murder. So when Willie Johnson came home and told his family he was accused of killing a white man, the Johnsons didn't waste time asking questions or seeking justice through the courts. They knew what justice looked like for black men in South Carolina. They panicked. They moved fast. They got Willie out of Charleston that very night, sending him north to New York City, where his sisters Margie and Pauline were already living. In New York, Willie would be safe. In South Carolina, he would be dead. But Willie's escape didn't solve the Johnson family's problems. It multiplied them. Now they were the family of a fugitive. Now they were under suspicion. Now every white sheriff and vigilante in Charleston knew their name. By 1919, the humidity of Charleston had become stifling for the Johnson family, thick with the unsaid threats of the Jim Crow South. Ellsworth was only 14, but his father saw the way the boy looked at the world, with a sharp, defiant intelligence that wouldn't bow to the local status quo. Fearing that Ellsworth's fire would eventually draw the shadow that nearly claimed his brother Willie, his father made the agonizing decision to uproot him. The official story told to the neighbors was that Mabel, Bumpy's older sister, could provide him with better opportunities in the north. The unspoken truth was much darker. They were sending him away to keep him from becoming another name on a long, tragic list of Southern sons who never came home. When the train doors opened in New York, the transition was jarring. At 14, Bumpy Johnson was a physical contradiction. He was small for his age, barely 5 feet tall and thin as a rail, with a distinctive bump on the back of his skull that gave him a slightly eccentric appearance. To compensate for his slight frame, he cultivated a persona made of flint and iron. He walked with an exaggerated rhythmic swagger and spoke with a booming confidence that dared anyone to question his presence. He refused to show an ounce of the country boy fear he felt vibrating in his chest. But Harlem was a city of sharks, and Bumpy was navigating a concrete ocean he didn't understand. He quickly realized that in a neighborhood where everyone was fighting for a foothold, attitude was merely a coat of paint. It didn't mean anything if the structure underneath couldn't hold. On his very first day at school, as he stepped onto the sidewalk only 2 blocks from the entrance, Bumpy ran headlong into a group of local teenagers who saw only a small, easy target. It was there, amidst the clatter of dice and the sneers of bullies, that Bumpy Johnson would learn exactly how far a tough guy attitude goes before you have to back it up with blood. He was only 2 blocks from his new school when he crossed paths with them. 6 teenagers stood on a street corner throwing dice against a brick wall, money scattered at their feet. They were older than Bumpy, bigger than Bumpy, and they moved with the casual confidence of boys who owned these streets. Bumpy slowed down, glancing at them as he passed. He was curious. In Harlem, gambling happened in back rooms and hidden places. Here, these boys did it right out in the open, like they had nothing to fear. He was just about to walk away when he heard one of them call out, "Hey yo, country boy!" Bumpy felt a hand grab his arm, yanking him back. He turned to find himself surrounded. "What you got in your pocket, country?" one of them asked, grinning. Bumpy looked him dead in the eye. "My hand? Why, you got a problem with that?" The other boys laughed. One of them, a kid they called Junie, slapped his knee. "Ooh, this old country boy got some mouth on him." Another boy stepped closer. They called him 6 and 8, a tall, thick kid with arms like a grown man.
"Well then, take your hand out your pocket and let me see what else is in there." Bumpy didn't blink. "Man, you don't want me to take my hand out of my pocket, because if I do, I'm gonna smash it against your head." The street went quiet for half a second. Then chaos. The other boys immediately started making bets, shouting over each other. A kid named Finley put his money on 6 and 8. Another boy, Nat, looked at Bumpy, this skinny little new kid from the south, and put his money down on him. 6 and 8 threw the first punch, aiming straight for Bumpy's chin. He missed. Bumpy, smaller and faster, ducked easily. 6 and 8's momentum carried him forward, throwing him off balance. And that's when Bumpy struck. He pulled his hand from his pocket, and true to his word, 6 and 8 was going to regret it. The punch landed square in the middle of 6 and 8's face. There was a sickening crack as his nose shattered. Blood sprayed everywhere. 6 and 8 dropped to his knees, howling. Bumpy didn't stop. His second punch caught 6 and 8 in the ribs, doubling him over. 6 and 8 clung desperately to Bumpy's pants, trying to pull himself back up, but Bumpy hit him again. And this time, something fell from Bumpy's fist. Coins. They scattered across the pavement, glinting in the afternoon sun. Bumpy had been fighting with his fist wrapped around a handful of coins, turning his small hand into a weapon that hit like brass knuckles. "That's not fair," Finley shouted, pointing. "He's fighting dirty." But Bumpy didn't care about fair. He kept swinging, blow after blow, until 6 and 8 finally released his grip. Then Bumpy delivered a vicious kick between his opponent's legs, dropping him completely. 6 and 8 lay gasping on the pavement, but Bumpy wasn't finished. He pulled his leg back, preparing to kick the boy in the head, a blow that could kill. Before he could deliver it, a hand grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him backward, slamming him against a parked car. It was Nat. "Okay, lil' man," Nat said, holding Bumpy at arm's length. "I won me my money already, but I can't let you kill my boy here." Bumpy's eyes were still wild, adrenaline coursing through him. "Fuck you," he spat, ready to fight Nat too. Nat just smiled, slowly releasing him and backing away with his hands up. "I ain't fighting you, man. Like I said, you won me my money, and you better be glad there was somebody here to stop you, because you were about to catch a murder charge on your first day." Bumpy stood there, breathing hard, coins still in his bloody fist, staring at the boys around him. 6 and 8 was on the ground, groaning. Junie and Finley were looking at Bumpy like he'd just grown 2 heads, and Nat was counting his winnings, grinning like he'd just discovered gold. In that moment, 14-year-old Bumpy Johnson learned the most important lesson of his life. Size doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. What matters is that you're willing to go further than the other guy. What matters is that when someone tests you, you don't just fight back, you make them regret ever looking at you. It was a lesson he would never forget. It was a lesson that would make him a legend. And it was a lesson that would leave a trail of bodies from Harlem to Alcatraz and back again. By 1930, Bumpy Johnson had spent over a decade learning Harlem streets the hard way. He'd done time in reformatories and prisons, emerging each time harder, smarter, more dangerous. He'd worked as muscle for local operators, breaking legs and collecting debts. But he was still just another hood with fast fists and a reputation for violence. That changed the day he met Madame Stephanie St. Clair. She was unlike anyone Bumpy had ever encountered. a French-speaking immigrant from Martinique, Stephanie St. Clair had built the most sophisticated illegal lottery operation in Harlem. They called it the numbers game, and it was pure genius. Poor folks bet nickels and dimes on three-digit numbers, hoping to hit it big. The odds were terrible, but the dream was irresistible, and Stephanie had turned that dream into an empire worth millions of dollars. But what set her apart wasn't just her business acumen, it was her defiance. While other black operators paid tribute to white mobsters and corrupt cops, Stephanie St. Clair bowed to no one. She fought City Hall in court. She published the names of crooked police in the newspapers. She stared down threats from the most powerful gangsters in New York and never blinked. When she looked at Bumpy Johnson, she didn't see a common thug. She saw a chess player disguised as a pawn. She saw a man whose intelligence matched his ruthlessness, whose pride wouldn't let him serve anyone who didn't earn his respect. She made him her chief enforcer, her knight, and under her mentorship, Bumpy learned that real power wasn't just about violence, it was about psychology, politics, and strategy. For 2 years, they ruled Harlem together. The money flowed like water, the respect was absolute. And then Dutch Schultz showed up. Arthur Flegenheimer, known as Dutch Schultz, was one of the most violent gangsters in New York. He'd made millions bootlegging during Prohibition, and when the liquor laws changed, he needed new revenue streams. The Harlem numbers racket looked like easy money, and the fact that it was run by a black woman made him think it would be even easier to take. He was catastrophically wrong. Schultz's approach was simple and brutal. He sent his men into Harlem with guns and baseball bats, smashing up numbers joints, beating operators, and demanding control. He had the police in his pocket, Tammany Hall politicians backing him, an army of Irish and Jewish gunmen who'd killed dozens of men without consequence. Most people expected Stephanie and Bumpy to fold. After all, what chance did black operators have against a white mob boss with unlimited resources and political protection? But Bumpy Johnson had learned something crucial during his years on Harlem streets. You don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be willing to bleed them until victory costs more than it's worth. The war began quietly. Schultz's collectors started disappearing. His enforcers got shot in broad daylight on busy street corners. His operations were firebombed. Every time Schultz sent 10 men into Harlem, 9 came back, then 8, then fewer. It was asymmetrical warfare, guerrilla tactics, a systematic campaign of terror designed to make Harlem the most expensive piece of real estate Dutch Schultz would ever try to claim. And leading every attack, planning every ambush, standing in the middle of 125th Street with a gun in his hand and a smile on his face, was Bumpy Johnson. The streets of Harlem ran red with blood, but Bumpy didn't surrender. He couldn't, because surrendering meant admitting that a black man would always have to bow to a white man's power, and that was the one thing Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson would never do. Not then, not ever. They called it the Schultz War, but it wasn't a war in any traditional sense. Wars had battle lines, armies, and rules of engagement. What Bumpy Johnson waged against Dutch Schultz was something else entirely. It was a ghost hunt, a nightmare, a daily reminder that Harlem would never be conquered. It started small, a policy bank on 116th Street. 3 of Schultz's collectors walked in at noon to shake down the owner. By 12:15, all 3 were dead on the floor. The shooter had walked in behind them, done the job, and disappeared into the crowded street. Witnesses saw nothing, but everyone in Harlem knew who sent the message. 2 days later, Schultz's counting house on 8th Street burned to the ground at 3 in the morning. Inside, tied to chairs, were 2 of his enforcers. They survived, barely, but they never returned to Harlem. Schultz flooded the neighborhood with more men, better armed, more vicious. It didn't matter. A week later, 5 of Schultz's gunmen were ambushed outside a speakeasy on Lenox Avenue. They were eating lunch when car doors opened and Thompson machine guns roared. 3 dead, 2 crippled for life. The pattern became Bumpy's signature. Schultz's men never knew when or where he'd strike. Broad daylight on crowded streets, dark alleys at midnight, restaurants, barbershops, anywhere. Nowhere was safe. And Bumpy didn't need to win every fight. He just needed to make every day in Harlem cost Dutch Schultz more blood than the numbers racket was worth. But something unexpected was happening. The people of Harlem were watching, and in their eyes, Bumpy Johnson was becoming more than a gangster. He was becoming a symbol. Here was a black man refusing to be pushed around by white authority. Here was someone who stared down the most dangerous mobster in New York and didn't flinch. Every time one of Schultz's men went down, it felt like victory against every cop who'd beaten them, every landlord who exploited them, every system designed to keep them powerless. Shopkeepers greeted Bumpy by name. Old ladies blessed him on corners. Young men begged to join his crew. Kids called him the people's champ, and the name stuck like gospel. Bumpy understood the power of perception. He moved through Harlem openly now, shaking hands, buying groceries for struggling families, sitting in restaurants where everyone could see him. He wanted Schultz to understand this wasn't just business, this was about who Harlem belonged to. And the answer was clear. Harlem belonged to its people, and Bumpy Johnson belonged to Harlem. By 1935, Dutch Schultz was hemorrhaging money and men. His backers grew nervous. The police protection he'd bought became worthless because Harlem witnesses suddenly couldn't remember anything. His reputation crumbled because one black man in a tailored suit was making him look weak. The war couldn't continue. Something had to break. And when it finally did, the breaking would come from not Harlem's streets, but from a restaurant in Newark where Dutch Schultz would sit down for his last meal, courtesy of the Italian Mafia, who decided he was too much trouble to keep alive. October 23, 1935. Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey
For a business meeting. He never walked out. 2 men with guns executed him and 3 of his associates in the back room. The hit was ordered by the Commission, the ruling body of the Italian Mafia, who'd grown tired of Schultz's erratic behavior and the attention he was drawing from law enforcement. For Bumpy Johnson, Schultz's death should have been a victory. The man who'd tried to steal Harlem was gone. The war was over. But Bumpy was smart enough to understand that one problem had simply been replaced by another, potentially larger one. With Schultz dead, the Italians now controlled his entire operation, and they weren't going to just walk away from Harlem's lucrative numbers racket. The question wasn't whether they'd come for it. The question was whether they'd negotiate or simply take it by force. 2 weeks after Schultz's assassination, Bumpy received a message. Lucky Luciano wanted a meeting. Charles Lucky Luciano was the most powerful mobster in America. He'd reorganized the Italian Mafia into a modern criminal corporation, ending the old blood feuds and establishing the commission that now governed organized crime across the country. When Lucky Luciano summoned you, you came, no exceptions. The meeting took place in a private room at a restaurant in Little Italy. Bumpy arrived alone, as requested, walking into a room where 5 Italian men sat waiting. Lucky Luciano sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed, his scarred face revealing nothing. Bumpy took the seat directly across from him. Neither man blinked. Luciano spoke first, his voice calm and businesslike. "You cost us a lot of money, Bumpy. Schultz's war with you made his operation worthless. We had to kill him because of you." Bumpy didn't apologize. "He came into my neighborhood thinking he could take what wasn't his. I defended what was mine." "Your neighborhood?" Luciano raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because from where I'm sitting, Harlem's in New York, and New York belongs to us." The tension in the room was suffocating. Every man present understood that this conversation could end with Bumpy's body in the Hudson River. But Bumpy had learned something crucial during the Schultz War. Respect only comes to those who refuse to show fear. "You can try to take Harlem," Bumpy said quietly, "just like Schultz tried. But I promise you, it'll cost you more men, more money, and more headaches than it's worth. Or we can make a deal that benefits both of us."
Luciano studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "I like you, Bumpy. You got balls. So here's my offer. You run Harlem's numbers operation. You handle all the day-to-day business, all the collections, all the enforcement. In return, you pay us a percentage, 10% off the top. We provide protection from other families trying to move in, and we keep the cops off your back when we can." "And if I say no?" Bumpy asked. Luciano's smile disappeared. "Then we have a different conversation, one that doesn't end with you walking out of here." Bumpy considered it. It wasn't true independence. He'd be paying tribute, acknowledging the Italian's ultimate authority, but it was more power than any black gangster in America had ever held. He'd control Harlem, run it his way, make his own decisions. The cost was 10% and his pride. He extended his hand across the table. "Deal." Luciano shook it, and in that moment, Bumpy Johnson became something unprecedented in American organized crime, a black boss with the Mafia's blessing to rule his own territory. The years between 1935 and 1952 were Bumpy Johnson's golden age. He wasn't just a gangster anymore. He was an institution, a force of nature, the unofficial mayor of Harlem, and he played the role with a sophistication that would have made Tammany Hall politicians envious. The money flowed like the Mississippi. The numbers racket alone generated millions annually, and Bumpy's 10% tribute to the Italians still left him wealthier than he'd ever imagined. He invested in legitimate businesses, owned nightclubs and restaurants, wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than most Harlem families earned in a year. He moved through the neighborhood like royalty, and in many ways, that's exactly what he was. But Bumpy understood something that many gangsters didn't. Power without loyalty is just violence waiting to collapse. So he built loyalty the old-fashioned way, by making himself indispensable to the community he ruled. Every Thanksgiving, Bumpy personally distributed turkeys to hundreds of families in Harlem. He'd stand on street corners with his crew, handing out birds to anyone who needed one, no questions asked. Old women would kiss his cheek and call him a blessing. Children would crowd around him, knowing Uncle Bumpy always had candy in his pockets. When families couldn't make rent, Bumpy paid it. When the police harassed local businesses, Bumpy made a phone call and it stopped. When talented kids needed money for college, Bumpy funded scholarships, sending dozens of young black students to universities they could never have afforded otherwise. He attended church on Sundays, donated to community organizations, and made sure everyone in Harlem knew that Bumpy Johnson took care of his own. The newspapers started calling him the Robin Hood of Harlem, and Bumpy didn't discourage the comparison. He cultivated the image carefully, understanding that every turkey, every paid rent, every scholarship was an investment in something more valuable than money. It was an investment in silence, in loyalty, in the unbreakable code that said you never ever cooperated with the police when it came to Bumpy Johnson. But beneath the generosity and the community spirit, the empire ran on darker fuel. The numbers game exploited the poor's desperate hope for a better life, taking nickels and dimes from people who could barely afford food. And increasingly, Bumpy was expanding into narcotics, bringing heroin into the same community he claimed to protect. He justified it with the cold logic of survival. The Italians were in the drug trade, and if Bumpy wanted to maintain his position, he had to evolve with the business. Besides, he told himself, if he didn't sell it, someone else would. At least he kept the truly predatory dealers out of Harlem, the ones who sold to kids or operated near schools. It was a rationalization, and somewhere deep down, Bumpy knew it. But the money was too good, the power too intoxicating, and the alternative, stepping aside and letting someone else control Harlem's destiny, was unthinkable. So the contradictions multiplied. The man who funded scholarships also funded addiction. The man who protected widows also created them. The man called the People's Champ was slowly poisoning his own people. But in 1952, the Golden Age came to a crashing end. Federal agents, frustrated by Bumpy's immunity to local prosecution, built a drug conspiracy case they couldn't ignore. The trial was quick, the verdict inevitable. Bumpy Johnson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with 11 to be served at Alcatraz, the most notorious prison in America. As the guards led him in chains, Bumpy looked back at the courtroom filled with Harlem residents who'd come to support him. Some were crying, others sat in stunned silence, and Bumpy wondered if he'd ever see his kingdom again. Alcatraz Island sat in the middle of San Francisco Bay like a tombstone rising from the water. They called it the Rock, and it was designed for one purpose: to break men who couldn't be broken anywhere else. Al Capone had done time there, Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Stroud, the Birdman. Now Bumpy Johnson joined their ranks, prisoner 1117. The isolation was crushing. No contact with the outside world beyond censored letters, no newspapers, no phone calls. The cells were 5 feet by 9 feet, barely larger than a coffin. Guards watched every movement, listened to every conversation. The cold fog rolled in off the bay and seeped into your bones, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks became the soundtrack to your slow descent into madness. But Bumpy Johnson refused to break. While other prisoners fought, screamed, or withdrew into catatonic silence, Bumpy adapted. He read voraciously, devouring every book in the prison library: Shakespeare, philosophy, history, political theory. He studied French and Spanish. He wrote poetry, filling notebooks with verses that he'd never show another soul. His fellow inmates started calling him the Professor, and even the guards treated him with grudging respect. In his cell at night, Bumpy would close his eyes and picture Harlem, the sounds of jazz clubs on 125th Street, the smell of soul food cooking in apartment windows, the sight of kids playing stickball in the streets. He held on to those memories like a drowning man holds on to driftwood, because without them, Alcatraz would have swallowed him whole. But while Bumpy maintained his dignity behind bars, Harlem was falling apart without him. The power vacuum he left behind was catastrophic. With no one strong enough to maintain order, Harlem's underworld fractured into warring factions. The Italians moved deeper into the territory, no longer content with their 10%. Small-time operators who'd been kept in check by Bumpy's authority now fought openly for scraps of his empire.
Violence escalated, bodies piled up, and worst of all, heroin flooded the streets like a plague. Without Bumpy's rules, no selling to kids, no operating near schools, no selling garbage product, the drug trade became a free-for-all. Dealers set up on every corner, pushing poison to anyone with money. Teenage addicts started appearing in emergency rooms. Mothers watched their sons and daughters waste away, chasing a high that Bumpy had helped introduce to the neighborhood. The community institutions he'd supported began to crumble. The scholarships stopped. The Thanksgiving turkeys disappeared. The rent money dried up. The protection from outside predators vanished. Harlem, which had thrived under Bumpy's contradictory reign, now suffered in his absence. Old-timers sat on stoops and remembered the days when Bumpy Johnson kept order, when the streets were safer, when there was someone who cared enough to at least pretend the neighborhood mattered. They forgot about the violence, the exploitation, the moral compromises. They remembered only that things had been better when Bumpy was free. And in his cell on Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson counted the days, knowing that every sunrise on the Rock was another sunset of chaos in the kingdom he'd built. 11 years. That's how long he'd served before seeing Harlem again. 11 years of watching his legacy crumble from 1,000 miles away, powerless to stop it. The question wasn't whether Harlem would survive his absence. The question was whether Harlem would still recognize him when he finally came home.
In March 1963, Bumpy Johnson walked out of the iron gates of Alcatraz and into a world he no longer recognized. Freedom felt like stepping onto a foreign shore. The Harlem he returned to was a distorted reflection of the kingdom he had once ruled with a velvet glove and a switchblade. The streets were physically the same, but the soul of the neighborhood had been hollowed out. The heroin trade he had once managed as a strategic necessity had mutated into a rampant plague. On corners where children once played stickball, addicts now drifted in a skeletal haze. Abandoned brownstones had become shooting galleries, and the vibrant pulse of the Harlem Renaissance had been replaced by the quiet desperation of mothers burying sons. Bumpy looked at the devastation and saw his own fingerprints on the wreckage. The power vacuum he left behind had been filled by an emboldened Italian Mafia that treated Harlem like a colonial harvest rather than a sovereign partner. They had discarded Bumpy's delicate codes of neighborhood respect, pushing deeper into the community with an exploitative greed that set the streets on fire. But the most jarring shift was the rising consciousness of the people. From the sidewalk soapboxes, a new voice thundered with a moral clarity that Bumpy had never encountered: Malcolm X. When the two men finally met in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the precinct and the press, they found an unexpected brotherhood rooted in the scars of their pasts. Both knew the weight of a prison cell. Both refused to bow to a system that demanded their submission. Yet their visions for black liberation were parallel lines that could never touch. Malcolm saw the gangster life as a predatory trap, a cycle where black men destroyed one another for the crumbs of white institutions. He saw in Bumpy a brilliant general fighting for the wrong side of history. Bumpy, in turn, saw Malcolm as a man who possessed the one thing he had traded away long ago: a clean soul. He respected the prophet enough to offer him quiet protection against the rising tide of threats, even as he realized he was too deeply invested in the underworld to ever join the revolution. The assassination of Malcolm X in 1965 shattered something in Bumpy that no prison riot ever could. He realized Malcolm had been right. The gangster life was a dead end, but Bumpy was an old king in a young man's game. He reclaimed his territory and maintained his ironclad reputation, but the fire was dimming. He began mentoring a hungry, ruthless protege named Frank Lucas. Bumpy saw his own ambition in Frank, but it was stripped of the old codes. Frank didn't want a seat at the table. He wanted to burn the table down and build a heroin empire that bypassed every middleman, flooding the streets with a blue magic that would finalize Harlem's ruin. On a quiet Sunday in July 1968, the end came not with a gunshot, but with a sudden, sharp pain at a table in Wells' restaurant. As the Godfather of Harlem collapsed over his last meal, an era died with him. His funeral was a spectacle of contradictions: church ladies mourning beside numbers runners, all honoring a man who had been both Harlem's savior and his curse. As Bumpy was lowered into the earth, Frank Lucas stood by with dry, calculating eyes, ready to unleash a wave of destruction that Bumpy had paved the way for, but could no longer stop. Bumpy Johnson died a legend, but his legacy was written in the very poison that would haunt his streets for generations to come.
Thanks for watching. Your time and support mean the world to us. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next upload. Every comment, share, and bit of feedback keeps this community growing stronger. Stay positive, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.